Please welcome Jack Roney.
It's a great pleasure to be here with you. It's an honor to be here. I have to tell you, it's great to be back in Fargo, not in December for the Crystal Board meeting. It's nice to see a little bit of springtime here. I'm not a farmer, but I have had the privilege of working for farmers for 42 years now, and it's a tremendous honor for me to help American farmers keep their farms and to see farmers pass. Remember, he said you don't have to leave, although I acknowledge this is a great excuse to get out of here as the economist gets up to speak. But anyway, it's been great to see, I've been around long enough to see some of our farmers pass their farms along to their sons and daughters. And I hope that we can continue to work in Washington to ensure that you can do that. I've had some distractions when I've spoken before. This is pretty high on the list. So anyway, okay. So here's what I want to talk about, why we need a U.S. sugar policy, how it's working, and our challenges going forward. The U.S. sugar industry is one of the biggest in the world, 5th biggest producer in the world, 4th biggest consumer, and 3rd biggest importer, so we play a major role. We're very proud of the fact that our sugar farmers are among the most efficient in the world. People think because we have some import protection, we must be inefficient. That's not true. We are extremely efficient. Our beet sugar producers, well, overall, we're 20th lowest cost out of 95 countries. Now, most sugar countries are developing countries with very low, if any, standards for protecting the environment and food safety and worker safety and so on. We, on the other hand, adhere to the highest, arguably the highest standards in the world and some of the highest costs. Our beet sugar producers are the lowest cost beet sugar producers in the world. Now, before we start chanting USA, I would suggest that we could chant RRV because our River Valley sugar growers are the lowest cost beet sugar producers in the world. And I got about a dozen of my bosses here, and if you just put your hands up for a second, please. My sugar growers, thank you. You know, these guys, let's face it, they're the best in the world, and it's incredibly proud to represent them and to fight for them to be allowed to stay in business. Now the question that comes up, okay, if you guys are so efficient, why do you need a U.S. sugar policy? And the answer is really in the highly distorted nature of the world sugar market. Now this chart is just one line. This is the world average cost of producing sugar, going back about 28 years. And the world average cost of producing sugar is 19 cents over that time. Okay, now, if I put another chart up that showed the world price of sugar over this time, what would you expect? Well, you'd expect that to be higher than the cost of production, right? Hence, we could have a world sugar industry. But what's the reality? Well, this red line is actual prices. And this defies logic, doesn't it? But we have long periods when world sugar prices have averaged well below the world average cost of producing sugar. If we look at this period of almost 3 decades, you can see that while the world cost of producing sugar was 19 cents, the world price averaged only 13 cents. So that is just ridiculous. How can a world sugar industry survive at such low prices? Well, the key thing is that only about 1/4 of the world's sugar is sold at this, what we call the world dump market price. I know you have trouble seeing this, but that's okay. That's almost the point. This is about a dozen of the world's biggest sugar producers across the top, and down there is various subsidy programs. Every check mark represents some type of subsidy by a major producer. This was done in 2008. I would argue if this study were done now, we'd probably see more check marks rather than less. The world is getting more protectionist rather than less, especially during periods when commodity prices are low. Governments are coming in to keep their farmers afloat, to protect the food security of their countries. You can't blame them. But what we can't really control is how much these countries produce, how much they export, how much of their surplus they'd like to dump on a market like ours. The inevitable pie chart, this is the major sugar producers around the world. Again, it may be hard to read, but that's just a little cross-section, some examples of the subsidies in each of those programs. So that's what we're up against, and that's really why we need a U.S. sugar policy, is a response to these foreign subsidies. So what we've also talked about is The Zero for Zero resolution was introduced in Congress a couple of weeks ago. We support that. What that says is, we're kind of, putting our money where our mouth is. We're saying, when foreign countries eliminate their sugar subsidies, we will eliminate ours. On a level playing field, that world price will rise to reflect the cost of producing sugar. Our costs are below the world average, and we can compete. But to do anything different would be unilateral disarmament. It would be insane for us to give up our program before there are concessions by other countries, because what we would be doing is sending American jobs, good American jobs by efficient American producers, to foreign countries that continue to subsidize. That makes absolutely no sense. Although there are theoreticians out there who will say, oh, yes, lead by example. That's ridiculous. That's never worked. What we really need to do is work toward general multilateral disarmament, not unilateral. So back to the question then, well, how can we have a world sugar industry? How could it actually exist if prices are that low? Okay, so this price is kind of a proxy for that other red line that I showed, which was the world raw sugar price. This is the world average. This reflects the number 5 market in London. This is refined sugar trading. And what I wanted to look at was, it's really refined sugar is what food manufacturers and consumers buy. So what is that selling for when you're selling to manufacturers and consumers? So that's the world futures price. That's where, again, only about a quarter of the world sugar is traded. Now this green line, that's the world average wholesale price. This is hard to get at, but there was a survey by the International Sugar Organization, and they came up with this information. And so while the world average futures price is 21 cents, the world average wholesale price, where about 3/4 of sugar was actually being sold, was 31 cents. So it's exceeding the world price by about 46%. Now, to make this, I think, a little fair comparison to what we have in this country, let's look at developed country wholesale refined sugar prices, and those are virtually double the world price. So, this is how we get to have a world sugar market. In the countries where most of the sugar is produced, they receive prices that are well in excess of the so-called world dump market price and sufficiently in excess of their cost of production that they can stay in business. Okay, so how is U.S. sugar policy working in terms, I would look at 3 things: consumers, taxpayers, and producers. How are we faring? And I would argue that it's a great success for consumers and taxpayers. The producer safety net, though, is in danger. Here's where, in terms of what U.S. food manufacturers pay for sugar, I just put the U.S. price in. It's about 29 cents. So where the world developed country average wholesale price is 41 cents, U.S. food manufacturers who are in Washington always complaining about having to pay too much for sugar because they compare it to that world dump price. If you compare it to what their competitors are paying for sugar in the rest of the world, they're getting a great deal on sugar in this country. How about American consumers? This was a survey of retail sugar prices on the grocery store shelf. Very fair comparison. And here's the U.S. at 59 cents. Now the global average, that's the red bar. The green bar, the global average is 71 cents, and the developed country average is the yellow bar, much higher. So the globally, consumers pay about 20% more than American consumers. Developed country producers pay about 29% more. And just quickly, not to belabor this, but we often hear from critics of U.S. sugar policy that, gee, why can't we be more like Canada or Australia? They are open to world sugar. And just think of the wonderful benefits for Australian and Canadian consumers because they're open to world sugar. But what's the reality? Canadian consumers pay more for sugar than American and Australian consumers pay more for sugar than in America. So we have a fierce competition in the sales of sugar, and American consumers get a good deal. Now, what's also true is that the deal American consumers get could be even better. This is what's happened to the U.S. wholesale refined sugar price since the recent peak in 2010. And this is what our guys are up against. Our wholesale refined sugar price is down more than 50% since 2010. Okay, so what if I put on the next chart what have consumer prices for sugar and highly sweetened products been? What have they done? And are you tempted to think, well, certainly they would have fallen. This would be a huge consumer benefit. Well, you think so, don't put your hand up, because here's the reality. And this is what, over the same span, what the change has been for even retail sugar, and then for candy, cereals, ice cream, and other products. So the consumer benefits could be even greater if there were a pass-through. And this is an important point when we defend sugar policy in Washington, because we have the food manufacturers arguing, gee, if we could just get the sugar price down, U.S. consumers would get a break. They would save $3 billion a year is the number they put out on their purchases of sugar and sweetened products. Well, there's absolutely no evidence that there would be any pass-through of lower prices to consumers, and you just look at what we've seen here lately, and I think it's perfectly apparent that when the food manufacturers are arguing against sugar policy, it's not to benefit the consumers, it's to benefit the food manufacturers. And that's one of our challenges in Washington, to make that clear, that lower U.S. sugar prices or less U.S. sugar policy would certainly hurt producers. It wouldn't help consumers. It would only be a boost for the food manufacturers, who are already among the most profitable sectors in the U.S. economy. In terms of taxpayer costs, what this shows is the cost of U.S. sugar policy over time. So going back to 2002, all those zeros represent the fact that we've been zero cost. It was nice of Roger Johnson earlier today to say you can't take the budget savings out of sugar because we don't cost anything. Now, there was one exception. I'm going to talk about this a little bit. That was 2012-13, and that was when, under NAFTA rules that opened the U.S. sugar market to Mexican sugar in 2008, Mexico had a huge crop and dumped their surplus on the U.S. market. This was subsidized sugar, dumped on the U.S. market, destroyed our market, forced growers processors to forfeit on their loans, forced the government to come in and try to remove some of that surplus. Now, since that time, we brought cases. The U.S. government actually calculated dumping and subsidy duties of Mexicans of over 80% in total. So it wasn't even close. I mean, the Mexicans were very badly subsidizing. And what the U.S. and Mexican governments have done is worked out what are so-called suspension agreements, where they're saying, okay, rather than impose these huge duties and stop Mexican sugar from flowing into the United States at all, we're going to limit, it's a novel idea, we're going to limit how much Mexican sugar comes in to how much we need. So to try to balance the market that way, so that each year now the government calculates how much sugar we need from Mexico, which has been substantial amounts, about 1 million tons per year. The problem, though, has been that the suspension agreements haven't worked as planned, and where we thought Mexico was going to send in lots of raw sugar to keep our cane refineries going, they've been sending in mostly refined sugar. So the cane refineries are starved for raw sugar, and the refined market is depressed. You saw how much prices come down as a result. Now, if we look way out, the CBO looks out a number of years. That's the Congressional Budget Office. And they say if we resume trade with Mexico, if we don't impose the duties, and if the suspension agreements are eliminated, then there could be some cost again. But this is, the only factor, the only way sugar policy could cost anything is if we get subsidized and dumped sugar from Mexico again. Here's basically what happened. Mexico subsidizing. Until a few years ago, half the Mexican sugar industry was owned by the government. Until just a couple of years ago, a fifth of the Mexican industry was owned by the government. So the biggest sugar producer and exporter in Mexico was the Mexican government. How's that for free trade? But that's what we're up against. The Mexican government would not let their producers go out of business. And so the U.S. Department of Commerce calculated these subsidy and dumping margins, and the International Trade Commission ruled unanimously on 2 votes that Mexico is the cause of our injury. Here's what, this is imports of sugar from Mexico. You can see prior to 2008, the amounts were minimal. Then they absolutely took off. And this is the period when they wrecked our market, when they doubled, they had a huge crop, but they had higher prices than we did. Why? They got rid of the surplus. They dumped it on the U.S. market. So that was kind of one of the ironies. While our guys were reeling, the Mexican producers were faring better than we were. And then the suspension agreements were put in place, and so the import amounts have gotten more reasonable, but there's still fairly generous access for Mexico. And here's what's done to our wholesale refined sugar prices. Whoops. What we have is we had a world price spike back in 2010. Then the Mexican dumping came in. Our prices dropped dramatically. We had forfeitures in here. We brought the cases, and the price improved somewhat, but then the suspension agreements have brought in way too much Mexican refined sugar, and we're hurting again. Here's another way of looking at what we have been up against. This is U.S. Producer prices. Here we go again. Remember, it's not real. Should we listen? Okay, stay calm. Okay, so look how flat this is going. This is our wholesale refined price. This is nominal prices, not corrected for inflation. And what I just put on here over these years, these are all the beet and cane mills that we've lost in each of those 5-year periods. This is very sentimental for me. We lost Hawaii last year. Hawaii had been producing sugar for almost 200 years with some of the highest yields in the world. Actually, the highest yields per acre in the world in Hawaii. But the Mexican dumping pounded their price down so low that they had to exit sugar. It's heartbreaking for that state. And but what the users, the sweetener users who oppose us, they focus on that price spike year, and they're always complaining. They act as though it's kind of time warp argumentation, like sugar prices are still high, but they're back down. And we looked at this a little bit. Other speakers have talked about this. Mark mentioned it. This is the real price. So here's the nominal sugar price. And look at the real wholesale refined sugar price. It's down 43% since 1985. This is ridiculous. I mean, how can you guys do this? It's just, it amazes me that with your real price down by more than 40%, that you could stay in business. We've lost a lot of operations, and the ones that remain are, as I've said, among the most efficient in the world. And here's what's been happening with your costs, where since the mid-'80s, the sugar price came up about 5%. But look at the fertilizer and machinery has doubled. Wages up 1.5 times. Gasoline and diesel fuel have tripled. This is what you're up against while facing a price that is not rising with that, but of course flat. So tremendous challenge for our folks. So to summarize then, or to repeat, the consumer success as far as low retail prices are concerned, taxpayer success, zero cost, 14 of the last 15 years. USDA projects will stay zero cost for the next 10 years. And the producer safety net is threatened by Mexico. So our challenges going forward, we're working with the U.S. government. Whoops, wrong button. I was afraid I was going to hit that. We're working with the U.S. government to, they told me not to hit that button, and I finally hit it on my last try. But I think I can remember what I was going to say. The challenges are to work with the U.S. government and find a way to work out a reconciliation with Mexico that will allow Mexico to still send sugar to the U.S., but without dumping the sugar on the U.S. market and not exceeding our needs. The other aspect of this that we have in terms of our challenges are to maintain, oh, wonderful, thank you, Celine. Let's see, let's go one more. There we are. We've got to sustain the safety net with effective zero-cost sugar policy in the 2018 Farm Bill. Crucial elements, and this is one of the great pleasures for me to be here today to reinforce how important it is to have our sugar grower participation. The gentlemen who put up their hands before are not only great farmers, but they take their time away from the farm to come to Washington to help us lobby. There are no better lobbyists in Washington for agricultural policy than the farmers. We suits can go up there and talk a lot, but when our congressmen and senators see actual farmers coming in and telling them firsthand what's going on, that's incredibly effective, and as it is for other commodity programs as well. So we like working with the other commodity groups. It's absolutely valuable. We hang together or we hang separately, and we want to continue to do that. Another thing that we don't take for granted, we absolutely appreciate, is the support of the North Dakota and Minnesota delegation. These are some of the greatest champions for agriculture in Washington, and we're grateful to them. Thank them anytime you see them, because they're there for us every time we need them.